Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Okay, everyone you can hear me okay, Rachel?
Yep. I'm still here.
Oh shoot, let me just, I got to change this audio here just a second. Okay, there we go. All right. Sorry about the delay. Okay. So Rachel Nix, she became a lecturer in applied mathematics at the School of Mathematics in the University of Birmingham before becoming a research fellow at the University of Nottingham at the School of Mathematical Sciences, where she is currently at as an assistant professor. And her work is all in the applies methods from nonlinear dynamical systems to questions in neuroscience and biology. And most recently, she's been working on the application of these techniques to problems in mathematical neuroscience. So please take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, like I said, there's going to be a strong crossover of what I'm talking about here with Youngmin's work. So if you're familiar with his, then this should be familiar to you. And also, as I've heard my colleague Steve Coombs gave a talk recently as well. So maybe you're familiar with Nottingham, but I thought I'd give you a little overview of where I am. So Nottingham is a mid-sized city right in the centre of England there, far from the sea, most famous for Robin Hood, and there's the statue that sits outside the castle just there. And I'm here at the University of Nottingham. This is a nice campus with this lovely lake. And it's quite famous for being the birthplace of MRI, when it's now home to the Sir Peter Mansfield Imaging Centre. Lots of researchers in there.
Flipping through the slides, I think, because we see the non-full screen.
Oh, okay. I did have it on full screen, so I try. Let me just. I stop sharing, and then if I just share my window, my entire screen instead, and then you can see what I can see. So let me see you for a minute, and then is this better?
Yes.
Okay, and then now you get to see the fancy sliding between pictures. There we go. Okay, so it's about MRI, and we also have some established strengths in foundational behavioural neuroscience, clinical neuroscience. So we're quite lucky here to have lots of nice people to talk to. But I'm within the School of Mathematical Sciences. We have a mathematical neuroscience group. It's one of the 11 research themes. And so this is the building. I'm currently in this office here. This is where I'm talking to you from. So this is the nice building that we have here. And so important members of the group that I've mainly worked with are Professor Stephen Coombs, as you maybe remember from a previous seminar. And we have two joint PhD students. I'm going to talk about the work we've been doing with them today. So we have Robert Allen and Matthew Fellows. So Robert's just writing up. He's nearly finished, and Matthew's got another year or so to go. Okay. So we're talking about neural oscillations at various spatial scales. So we can have single neurons, periodic firing. We can talk about neural populations, so in an area of the brain, and having oscillations. And you might record with an EEG signal, for example, so recording a voltage from a population of neurons at a certain position. Even coarser grained level, we can have tissue level activities of waves of activity spreading across the cortex. And we can have models of this at various scales as well. So we've got famous single neuron models from your Hodgkin Huxley and your Morris Lacar, and various other ones, Fitzhugh-Nagumo, and we put them into networks. But equally, we could have a little network representing the population, and then we can put those into networks. So we get a sort of a neural mass network. So we have a model of the population activity, and then we couple that to populations at other parts of the brain. Or what we can do is we can put those into a continuum and say that everywhere is a neural mass model, and we end up with these neural field models, and then we can describe things like waves, activities, traveling waves, standing waves, and things like that. So these are the kinds of things we're interested in. But to study these, what we could do is we could just numerically simulate all of the models. but more satisfactory for mathematical neuroscientists is to understand the mechanisms behind changes in activity as changes in the solutions as you change parameters, and to get some insight into that when the underlying base level sort of activity is oscillatory is quite a challenge. So we tend to look at these phase and isostable phase-based models. Okay, but today we're going to be looking at when a basic phase description is not enough to describe the activity that we see. So I'm going to start off by talking about the basic phase reduction and how we can extend that to a more accurate description of what's going on, and getting rid of overcoming some of the limitations of the phase reduction technique. So I'm going to talk about how we can get a network description where each of the nodes is described by a phase and sort of an amplitude type variable. And then we're going to look at how we can see what the stability of the different phase lock states in that network is. We can look at small networks and large networks. And then I'm going to look at how you can incorporate delays within those networks. And if we have time, then I'll look at how we can look at continuum networks from a phase and isostable sort of background. Okay, so this is a recap of basic phase reduction, which you may be familiar with. So we've got these coupled dynamical systems, but they've got a stable limit cycle with some period, which I'm going to call T, and the limit cycle is going to be called gamma. And so I can define in the basin of attraction of this limit cycle a phase which increases linearly, and so off of the limit cycle itself, I can just define the phase by this asymptotic phase, where all of the points on this thing called the isochrons have the same asymptotic phase. They decay back to the limit cycle and join and have the same phase. So I'm talking about coupled systems where we've got some local dynamics described by this F, and we've got an overall coupling strength epsilon, and Wij representing which nodes are connected to which other ones. So it's sort of adjacency matrix type thing, but it might be weighted. And we've got a function G describing the type of coupling between the nodes at J and I. Okay, so what we could do is we can make a phase reduction. So we could say, we just get one equation for how the phases interact by making this phase reduction, where we have the coupling function here, and we also have this phase response. So if I perturb my the phase of my oscillator a little bit, if I provide a perturbation, does it advance or retard the phase? And this is quantified by this phase response. So this is clearly said is the phase response at any point in my basin of attraction, but that's hard to calculate. So what we really do in practice is we calculate it on the limit cycle and say that we've got the infinitesimal phase response. So we're looking at small perturbations from being on the limit cycle. And then we can calculate this infinitesimal phase response by giving a small perturbation to our model and seeing what happens to the phase. So you look at the change in times between the peaks. So here I've given a negative voltage perturbation to this. I think this is a Morris-Lacar neuron near its homoclinic. So perturb the black oscillator by a small voltage, and we see that it brings forward the next spike. The red is the resulting trace from the perturbed trajectory. So we can calculate the phase response that way, or the way that we do it would be, because we've got a set of model equations, is to solve this adjoint equation for the phase response set. So we just solve this ODE with the periodic boundary conditions and subject to this normalization condition. Okay, so J here is the Jacobian evaluated on the limit cycle. Okay, so if we do this, then we have this nice set of equations here for how theta evolves. But to analyze this, it's nice to get a phase difference equation, which we can find by taking first order averaging this equation. So now we have this phase difference formulation over here. Okay, so we just have to calculate these interaction functions, this interaction function H1. Okay, it's normally just called H, but you'll see why it's called H1 later on. Okay, so that's a very nice framework, and it's been very successful in describing various phenomena that's observed. However, there are some limitations because we have to assume that this epsilon has to be quite small, because we have to stay near the limit cycle. You can't go far from the limit cycle, and it assumes that all of the node orbits all stay on that the node orbit of the uncoupled node. So, but sometimes, okay, and it also assumes that, so that assumes that any perturbations away from the limit cycle decay very quickly back to the limit cycle. So that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes we're looking at a model where there's slow decay to the limit cycle in some direction, and in that case we want to include another coordinate that describes that sort of distance from limit cycle. So let's see why this phase, a situation where this phase isn't enough to capture the dynamics. So suppose that we have a globally coupled network, and we want to look at the stability of synchrony in that network. Okay, so synchrony is going to be the solution where everything evolves. The phase of all of the nodes evolve with some collective frequency, which I'm going to call big omega. Okay, and if we're in a globally coupled network, so that all the Wij's are 1 over n. Okay, and so we can find an equation for the collective frequency, and then if we linearize, so do a linear stability analysis about that state, then we find that the Jacobian is just minus epsilon times h prime at 0 times this Laplacian matrix. Okay, so this is just this matrix with components given here, and this has eigenvalues 0 and +1, so that means that synchrony has eigenvalues 0 and the n-1 degenerate eigenvalue, which is minus epsilon h1 prime at 0. Okay, so that's telling you that synchrony is going to be stable if epsilon times h1 prime at 0 is positive. Okay, so that's a standard result. Now if we look at
Rachel, I'm sorry. How do you tell stability in presence of 0 eigenvalues from just having one negative eigenvalue?
The 1, 0 eigenvalue corresponds to perturbations along the limit cycle.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So okay.
Yeah. So
the 0 is just a shift of.
Yeah. So the stability depends on the other eigenvalues
Okay.
that are
sorry.
around the limit cycle.
Thank you.
That's fine. Good. Thank you. Okay. So let's take two of these Morris-Lacan neurons. So there's a planar neuron model. So we've just got two variables. We've got a voltage variable and some kind of recovery variable W. But because it's planar, we can draw the phase portrait. We've got the null lines, and we can see we've got an unstable equilibrium point here, a saddle, and a stable one here. And this is near a homoclinic bifurcation. So we've got this stable periodic orbit here. So we're going to couple two of these together linearly, just in the voltage variable, and see what we get out. Okay, so if we calculate the interaction function for that system, then we can see that h1 prime at 0, well, that's negative. Okay, so this is telling us that synchrony is going to be unstable for all values of epsilon bigger than 0. So this is our weakly coupled theory is telling us only that if epsilon is positive, then synchrony is going to be unstable. Okay, but if we do some numerical simulations, okay, so we take the epsilon being quite small, then indeed we do find other solutions are stable, such as this anti-synchronous stable state here, or this one with a one of the oscillators doing a large amplitude oscillation and one doing a small amplitude oscillation. But if we increase epsilon further, we find that synchrony is restabilized. And this can't be captured using the weakly coupled theory, because it doesn't allow for changes in stability as you change epsilon. So what we're looking for is something that can capture that. So to get a framework which can capture that, what I've done is we've introduced these isostable coordinates. Okay, so we've got some notion of distance, if you like, from the limit cycle, though it's not really a physical distance, it's sort of a tiny distance. So in each of the Floquet eigendirections of our limit cycle, we've got a Floquet exponent, which we're going to assume we've got a stable limit cycle, so all of these have negative real part. And we're going to take these isostable coordinates. They decay exponentially to 0 when there aren't any interactions. So on the limit cycle, the isostable coordinate is 0, and away from the limit cycle on all of these other blue dotted lines here, the isostable coordinate is equal, and you can see that the red dots start on the same isostable. They decay to the limit cycle at the same rate, and they arrive on the limit cycle in the same time. This is very simple. This is just a Stewart-Landau oscillator. That's why the isostables are circles. So in general, they wouldn't be circles, but it's a nice picture. Okay, so we've got m of those. If you've got an m-dimensional system for our node oscillator, then we're going to have n minus one of these isostable coordinates. What we're going to do is we're going to assume that there's sort of some time scale separation, and that one of these is much more slowly decaying than all the others, and we'll just keep that one, and we're going to throw all the other ones away. So we're just going to keep the isostable direction that corresponds to the most slowly decaying isostable coordinate. Okay, and we're going to call that phi for each of our oscillators, and then we put them into a network. And so for each of our oscillators, we have is described by its phase on the limit cycle and its most slowly decaying isostable coordinate. So then correspondingly, we've got the phase response of our oscillator and our isostable response. Okay, so that's if we give our oscillator a kick, does it increase or decrease the amount of time that it takes to decay to the limit cycle? Okay, and this is a well-established theory. It's definitely not mine. There's various people. I maybe should have included young men in here, but there's lots of people who've used this type of these coordinates. So I'm going to describe how I'm going to use it. So what we're going to do is we want to calculate these phase and isostable responses, but again, they're hard to calculate the whole basin of attraction, so we're going to calculate them near the limit cycle, but we're going to take the expansion a little bit to higher order around the limit cycle. So we've got the infinitesimal phase response, and we've got the infinitesimal isostable response, but we've also got some higher order correction terms in here because now we're allowing our position to be off the limit cycle. So we're on the limit cycle plus small distance away in the direction of these Floquet eigenfunctions. Okay, and so all of these response functions and the Floquet eigenfunction, they can all be calculated as solutions of certain ordinary differential equations with appropriate normalizations and boundary conditions, which I've not included here. But anyway, this is you can see that there's a set of equations, and you can calculate this to even higher order, which I think is what Win has done quite a lot of, is calculating all of these things to even higher orders. I'm just going to stick to this level of expansion for now. Yeah. Okay. So we calculate all of these things, and we also write our coupling function G in terms of all of these terms here, and then we arrive at a set of equations for our network up to order. Well, we're going to say order epsilon squared because we're going to let the size, so the isostable coordinates, be sort of order epsilon. So this is sort of an order epsilon squared expansion for our network equations, and we can calculate all of these H1s and H2s. And provided that we assume that kappa is small, so that our isostable coordinate is very slowly decaying, so essentially over one period it doesn't change, then you can average the equations, and we arrive at a set of phase difference equations. And then we can repeat all of the analysis that's been done for just phase equations in this phase isostable sort of framework, and we can find a more accurate description of the boundaries for the stability of all these phase lock states. So that's basically what we did in this paper down here. We can look at one-to-one phase lock states. So theta is evolving as omega t for some collective frequency omega, and we've got these phase lags sort of phi I. And so we can look at where these exist, and we would see that we have to assume that the isostable coordinate is constant, but that essentially comes from the fact that we've had to make that assumption to do the averaging in the first place. So we see then that the orbits of our phase-locked states, they live on the isostables of our node orbit. Okay, so this is better than first order phase reduction, because we're not assuming that they live on the orbit of the uncoupled node, but we do have to assume that they live on one of these isostables. But we get a better approximation. Okay. So then we can go ahead and we can work out the stability of all of these, but now we've got a much bigger system because we've got two equations for each of our n nodes in our network. So our Jacobian is going to be 2n times 2n. And unfortunately, although it is a block matrix, it doesn't really have any special structure. So when you just have phases, you have this sort of Laplacian structure, which allows you to relate the eigenvalues of your solution to the eigenvalues of your coupling matrix with the WIJs. So in general, we can't do that for phase and isostable, but we can if we assume certain special structures such as globally coupled networks. So we can calculate the eigenvalues of things like synchrony and splay states and other block balanced clusters. So if we talk about balanced clusters, they share a common orbit. So all of the nodes are going around some orbit, which is not necessarily the uncoupled, the orbit of the uncoupled node. Okay, so we're going to talk about having m clusters with little m nodes. I should have used a different letter. Okay, so the special cases would be that you have, for synchrony, you'd have n clusters with one in each cluster. No, other way around. You'd have all of your nodes in one cluster, and splay state would be that way around, where you have n clusters and one in each of those clusters. They're evenly spread out around the living cycle. Okay, so looking for those states, we can find the value of the isostable on which they live, and we can find the collective frequency with which they get around the limit cycle, and then we can calculate the stability, because then in this case each of the blocks in our Jacobian is block circulant, which means that they commute with each other. And then we've got some nice linear algebra results about the determinants of block matrices, which mean that we can write down what the eigenvalues of that Jacobian are. And I've not included any of that linear algebra because it's not pretty, but it's in the paper if you want to see it. Okay, so if we go back to our synchrony question, so now if we look at synchrony in this new framework, we can find we get the eigenvalues, we get the zero eigenvalue still, which is perturbations of the phase, so along the limit cycle, like we said before. Then we get another eigenvalue which corresponds to perturbations of our synchronous orbit away from so a synchronous solution, but away from the orbit that it's supposed to be on. And then we get other eigenvalues which correspond to perturbations off of the synchrony manifold, and each of those is of multiplicity n-1, and they are the eigenvalues of this matrix. And clearly, if we look at the eigenvalues of this matrix, they're going to have epsilon squared terms in epsilon, which means that we can have stability that changes at non-zero values of epsilon. Okay, so in theory, we can find a value of epsilon where the stability of synchrony changes. This should solve the problem with our Morris-Dakar example. And just to say that we can consider other types of solutions as well. So, for example, two cluster states where we'd have our two clusters of nodes of different sizes on different isostables, and then we can find those as well. We can find the collective frequency, we can find the phase difference between the two clusters, and we can find the isostables where those two live, and then we can compute stability conditions for those as well using equally horrible linear algebra, which is also in this paper, but I'm not going to focus on those today. Right, okay, so I'm talking a lot about this phase isostable framework where we keep theta and the psi coordinate, and we use both of those to describe what's happening to our oscillators. How does this fit in with what Young Min's been doing? Well, it's a very basic level. If you take away the order epsilon squared terms in the psi's, then this is just a linear equation in psi, and we can solve it for psi, and we substitute it back into the equation for theta, and then we can do the averaging. Okay, and then you don't have to necessarily make the assumptions on kappa that I had to get my average equations. Okay, and you can do that for you can this is the result for just getting a second order phase description, and you can do this for higher order, which is what Young Min's been doing in automating, and this is the framework that I think he's been using, but for much higher order than this. But what we can do is we can compare the two for some simple examples. So if we look at this network of this mean field coupled Ginzburg-Landau equation. So we've got two parameters in here. We've got a C2, which is in the nodes, and a C1 in the coupling here. We can find the exact values of the stability boundaries for all of these parameters. We can do it for synchrony and display states, then they're known, and we can compare them to what we get, the approximations that we get from this phase isostable on this higher order phase. And I've got some other, so we can do higher order phase to second order, like I showed on the previous slide, and do third order as well. We could do even higher order if we wanted. And there's another expansion that people called Leon and Peso have done using the fact that for this model, the isochrons are known, and so you can get a more, we can make it a different expansion. But I just plotted that on here as well. So I just like mention what it is. So here are the stability boundaries for synchrony on the top line and the display state on the bottom line of this network for when we've got n is bigger than 2, more than 2 nodes. So the exact boundaries are shown in the dark blue, the dark blue solid, and then what you get for a basic first order phase reduction. So the standard theory would just give you a straight vertical line telling you where the boundary of the stability is. If we take some of these second order, third order phase reductions, these are these dotted lines, and my phase isostable reduction is this light blue, which you don't see on the synchrony one because they line up exactly. So the phase isostable theory finds exactly the boundary stability for synchrony. And for the display state, it's quite good for small epsilon. They're all quite good for small epsilon. But as you can see, the higher order phase approximations tend to blow up over here for larger values of epsilon, whereas the phase isostable approximation, at least qualitatively, follows the same shape boundary. So you still get that there's the bifurcation is happening somewhere over here, but it doesn't quite get the exact value of epsilon, the coupling strength where it occurs, but it does qualitatively match. And so if you look at the stability regions for synchrony in blue and display state in red, then you can see it's a similar sort of shape. This is the full model here. This is the phase isostable. So we get a similar shape region, similar shape regions, and a similar shape region where neither synchrony or display state are stable. Whereas this is the third order, higher order phase approximation for a certain value of C2. It doesn't look anything like that. So based on this, make the conclusion that maybe the phase isostable approximation is all right. And so let's use it to describe this couple of Morris-Lacarte system that we were struggling to capture the restabilization of synchrony in before. So this is just the phase portrait again, just in a more colorful format, because now we've got the boundary of the basin of attraction of the orbit, which is in white. You can see that there. Now we've plotted on some of the isostables, so the level sets of the isostable coordinates, and we've got the isochrons are depicted by the colors there, and you can see they're quite twisty, right? Okay, so we can compute all of the coupling functions, all of the interaction functions. So the H1 is as before, And now we have all the H2 to H6 in addition to do all the phase and isostable, higher order phase bits and the isostables. And here, now we've calculated those functions, we can export them from wherever we've calculated them, and we can stick them into XPP. So we can get some nice bifurcation diagrams, and we can compare the bifurcation diagram for the full model. So this is just two nodes coupled together, and this is those same two nodes coupled together using the phase isostable reduction. So if we concentrate on the orangey red line, so that's synchrony. So here we can see synchrony is unstable, but as we increase epsilon, it becomes stable. And accordingly, in the for the phase isostable description, we see the same thing. We get this it's unstable, but it restabilizes at a larger value of epsilon. Okay, it doesn't accurately predict the value of epsilon, but qualitatively it manages to find this exchange of stability. And it also finds antisynchrony, so correctly predicts the stability of that up to this black square. This solution over here is in fact a different antisynchronous solution. So here the isostable coordinate has blown up to infinity or minus infinity from each side, depending on which boundary of the base of attraction it's got to. And so this is a different solution. It's one's outside the node orbit and one's inside the node orbit. And we just don't see that one over here, but maybe that's because it's unstable. We didn't find it in the bifurcation analysis. But what we can find with the phase isostable description is we can find these quasi-periodic solutions. So we can get Hopf bifurcations that occur in our phase isostable equations, which can tell us about quasi-periodic solutions that might exist in our original model. So indeed, we find some of these quasi-periodic solutions here, and if we simulate with those sort of parameters, if we simulate in this region here, where neither synchrony nor this phase lock state here is stable, then we indeed see quasi-periodic solutions arising in here, corresponding to these sort of solutions there, which is nice. Okay, so that's for 2 nodes. What if we have more nodes? So this is 200 nodes. So to look at more nodes, we don't need to do any extra work because we only have to calculate those 6 interaction functions, and we've already done that. And so we just put this stability theory in, and we put n is 200, right? And so we can work out the eigenvalues of the Jacobians for the synchronous state and the display state. And we see that, okay, there's this region sort of around here where both are unstable. So what happens here? See if we can predict what happens here with our theory. So we take, I guess, 0.065 we choose, and if we do a numerical simulation of the model 200 nodes, that's these black dots going around here. We started them near synchrony, so they're going to spread out. So they're going there. This red line here is the synchrony isostable. So I think that's the corresponding. It's the synchrony isostable, and this one here is the display state isostable, where that solution lives. And you can see as they spread out, they get closer and closer to the display state isostable. And if we let it go for longer and longer, if we let it go for ages, that we eventually get down to see that the stable solution, if you like, is this 3 cluster state.
Rachel, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can I ask you about the divergence of these points? So
Sorry.
right now you're basically plotting them along a cycle, right? What if you plotted them on the torus, where in one direction you have the angular variable and in the other you have phases? So would you see a cone, you know, like spreading out, or do you understand what I'm asking?
So you mean if you just plot?
I'm just trying to understand how these points, you know, how their phases spread out from the initially, you know, synchronized.
Yeah, we didn't do that. No. Yeah, but I guess the phases are spreading out, and they go towards synchrony and then back.
Right.
We have done on this one. We have a simulation where we simulate the phase and the isostable coordinate of the reduction to see what we get for the same value of the parameter. And actually, what we get is we get a cluster state, but it's a two cluster state. But it agrees with the theory that we can find that this is the two cluster state that is stable at that parameter value. So it is consistent, but we didn't plot the phases themselves. We just plotted them the V and the W components, and we computed the isostables for the reduction.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. So that's a sort of a summary of the general theory. That both of its higher order phase and the phase isostable approaches both have benefits. The higher order phase is nice because you can get a single equation, and then you can calculate the stability really nicely, easily. But if you want to increase the size of the network, then that increases the computational complexity, because you have to solve for the isostable coordinate, and that has more equations, the more nodes you include. Okay. And you still can't distinguish between nodes on different orbits, because you're just still assuming that you're on the limit cycle itself, the uncoupled node. So we've seen that the phase isostable approach is quite good at predicting qualitative behaviour, even if it doesn't quantitatively capture the bifurcation values. Instabilities happen, and you can allow your nodes to be orbiting away from the limit cycle. And you only need these 6 interaction functions to calculate it, but this does come with the cons that you have 2 equations per node, so you've not got such a decrease in dimension for this reduction, and it does require that you have a really slowly decaying kappa. But you can calculate, the existence and stability conditions, even though calculations are a bit more involved. So in conclusion, both approaches can capture some of the qualitative behaviour which first order phase reduction cannot. So both ways are useful. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to say, well, what if we have some delays in here? So we want to consider some more realistic neural models. So we want to look at Wilson-Cowan nodes, and we want to use those as models for brain regions, and then we want to couple those together into networks. Okay, so the Wilson-Cowan model has an excitatory population and an inhibitory population at each region in our brain. So each of these IJs, we have one of this pair of populations, and without any interactions, the activity decays away. But we have these inputs from some self-coupling within node coupling between the inhibitory and the excitatory populations, which are described by these weights, WEE, WEI, etc. And we have some external inputs, which are these P's, and this is sort of filtered through this firing rate function. So it takes the activity and gives you a probability of firing, and we generally take these to look like sigmoids, and that's just a phenomenological sort of assumption. So what we want to do is we want to couple these together, so we can take those as our node models, and we're going to assume that we get some, they oscillate. We've chosen some parameter values such that they oscillate, and then we're going to couple them together with other, with nodes at other disparate regions, so regions I and regions J that are some distance apart. Okay, and we can couple them together through the excitatory populations or the inhibitory ones, or a combination of both. For ease of explanation, I've just put in the coupling between the excitatory nodes, but that's the most popular one because long-range connections tend to be excitatory in the brain. So then we end up with this network, but then within this network, there are at least 2 sources of delays. So we can have delays within the nodes, so the oscillations of the nodes themselves could be delay induced. So that would involve putting some taus in on the local dynamics, and we can also consider connection delays where there's some finite time that it takes any signals from J to go to I, and we're going to call that delay tau ij. We're going to see how we can deal with both of those in this phase isostable framework. So let's start off with the nodes. Let's suppose that each of our nodes has a delay-induced oscillation because we've got this delay in the node dynamics. So what we need to do for our phase and isostable framework is to calculate the phase response and the isostable response of this node, of a stable solution to this DDE. So presuming we can find that there's a stable periodic solution, we can calculate the PRC and the IRC and their Floquet eigenfunctions and their higher order correction terms using slightly modified delayed or advanced retarded equations for these response functions. So we can calculate them all. Okay, so our solutions of these equations. How would you calculate the solutions of these equations? Well, you could stick them in your favorite DDE solver, but sometimes they're not very accurate. So what we've done is we've used this harmonic balance method because we know we're looking for periodic solutions out. I think I'm going to skip over this slide. If you're interested in how to calculate things using harmonic balance, then there's a paper at the end where I show how we do this. Basically, you're looking at the Fourier, calculating what the Fourier coefficients are for your periodic solution using some algebraic system of equations. So you approximate it using an algebraic system. You take it a truncation of your Fourier truncated Fourier series for your solution, and then you can use some nonlinear algebraic system of equations, which you can solve using your favorite fsolve routine to find what the Fourier coefficients are. And you can do that for all of the response functions, and you can use it to find what the Floquet exponents are. So if we do that for the Wilson-Cowan example, then the algebraic equation we get down to is that we need the determinant of some matrix that depends on the kappas, so the Floquet exponents to be 0. And if we plot the real part and the imaginary part of that, and we look at the contours, and we get a Floquet exponent where these cross, we unfortunately see that the smallest one, the one with the smallest real part, is in fact complex. So the one's here. So this is the one at 0 that we have to have. And then we've got this one here, which is complex, which does not fit with our established frameworks. We need to extend the framework to deal with complex Floquet exponents. So Dan Wilson has done some stuff with Floquet exponents that are complex, and we're kind of extending that to do all the stability stuff with the phase isostable framework. So my PhD student Robert Allen has done some of that, but he is running out of time to finish it. But we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so unfortunately, the first real one is further from 0, so we have to work out how to extend our theory. However, as I said, Robert has managed to calculate all of the response functions, but now, of course, they are complex, and so we've got a real part and imaginary part of all of them. But it can be done. So this is just a theoretical thing. Right, I'm running out of time, so I'll just quickly say something about delays in the network connections. So if we now say what we want to put delays in the network connections, then that's going to mean that in our phase and isostable equations, we're going to get delay differential equations as phase isostable equations. One approach to overcome this is to assume that the delay is small compared to the period of the oscillation, and then you can treat the delays as phase lags. However, this is not very satisfactory. It doesn't do a very good job of approximating stability boundaries, even for a simple example. So if you take, for example, 2 delay-coupled Stewart-Landau oscillators, so Stewart-Landau plus coupling, which is linear with some delay in it and just some rotation parameter rho here, then we calculate the phase and the isostable coordinate for phase and isostable, the isostable coordinate for the synchronous orbit and its collective frequency, satisfying this transcendental equation. Then we can find what the stability boundary is, and let's plot that. Okay, so this is these are plots of the collective frequency and the synchrony isostable for different values of tau and this other parameter which is related also to tau. Okay, then we can plot the stability boundary of synchrony and yes, this is synchrony. So the background colors represent a numerical simulation. So sort of the ground truth, what you get if you start near synchrony and simulate for a long time. And if we take the phase shift way of calculating the stability boundary of synchrony, we just get these straight lines. Okay, so that's not very accurate at all. If we use the delay differential equation, but just for the phase, so just this H1, we'd get quite a good boundary. This is black one. But if we use all of those terms, then we get this blue line, which is even better. So we are proceeding with using this phase isostable boundary, phase isostable reduction without going to a phase lag description. Right, I'm not going to have time to talk about this, but you can do continuum networks as well. Okay, so this our PhD student Matthew Bellows is looking at continuum networks. Okay, so now you have an oscillator everywhere in your on the line, but you can do the plane as well. We have one of these Wilson-Cowan things every point on our line, and some function that describes the wave connection between points at different distances away from each other. So it's a very brief rundown. And we can find the continuum versions of the phase and isostable descriptions. Okay, so it's just now we've got these integrals rather than sums, and we can do higher order phase as well. So then what we want to do is we want to calculate stability of phase waves. So we look at stability to different perturbations for different wave numbers. So we look at a phase wave with wave number eta, and then provide some perturbations and see what which perturbations that wave is stable to and which ones it's unstable to, and then we can plot some bifurcation diagrams. And here are some nice bifurcation diagrams. This is for phase only, and this is for the phase isostable. So red is where the wave with wave number 0.15 is unstable to the p's that are in red for this parameter, which is outside. It's in the kernels that describe the weight of the connections between different points on the line. So it doesn't come into the interaction functions. That's right, the phase response functions, etc. So we don't have to recompute them every time. Okay, and the point is that if we simulate in a region where we expect the phase wave to be unstable to these perturbations, we indeed see that instead of getting this traveling wave with this wave number, we've now got this different standing wave with some bits of traveling wave. And because we've got this, it's a higher order system, we've got two variables, it means that we can find hot bifurcations, and we also find that we can get this Bogdanov-Takens point where the two bifurcations collide. And here we get some really exotic behavior. So this solution down here, and so it looks a bit, it takes a long time, so we're not going to have enough time. I'll let this run. So it evolves to this sort of mixture of standing and traveling wave sections. Okay, and I think I've run out of time to do the conclusions. So yeah, it's just a useful framework, and we can do continuum things, and we can do delays. And yeah, thank you. Have you got any questions? Have you got any time for questions?
Rachel, yeah, any questions for our speaker? Feel free to unmute.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you.
Maybe I can, well, I guess real quick, I mean, I'm very excited to see the results of, of everything, but in particular, the last part. Do the ideas happen to work in R2 instead of R? Yeah,
I was going to say, yeah, that Matthew is currently doing, he's done the theory for R2 as well, but he's not got, yeah, he needs to do the simulations and compare like he has for R1, yeah. Yeah, then you can look at stability of more interesting patterns, right?
It's really great. And then just a specific question, very specific, but when using XPP for the bifurcation diagrams, were you did you import those H functions as just okay, like as like a lookup table?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
and then it's place, yeah.
That's helpful to know. All right. So yeah, any other questions? One more second. Going once, twice. All right. I guess we'll end here. All right. Well, thank you again, Rachel, so much for your time. Appreciate it.
No, thank you for the invitation, and sorry to have
Thank you very much.
No problem.
You're very welcome.
Very enjoyable.
Right.
All right. Take care,
Okay.
everyone.
Thank you. See you again soon, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bye.